One of my favorite political books is the book 1984, written by George Orwell. It was about life in a totalitarian government. But one of the themes of the book was the control of language. In the book 1984, the government was slowly replacing English with newspeak. And the reason was, if they take away words that have an edge, take away words with meaning, then you can't express what's wrong with the world. Well, we see that even in Canada today. For example, the government broadcaster, the CBC, has an official editorial policy not to use the word terrorist when describing a terrorist. They actually claim that chooses sides, so they use words like militant instead, as if that's the same thing. They only say terrorist if they're quoting someone else saying that naughty word. Well, I've never seen a case of newspeak as bad as in Australia, a new story out of the Sydney Morning Herald. They're mad at their Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, who uses the phrase death cult to describe the Islamic State. They're mad because it's so accurate. Of course, the Islamic State brings death to thousands of people, murdering them, Christians, any dissidents, even Muslims who don't hold themselves to the same fundamentalist extremes. And of course, they want death for themselves. They believe that to die as a martyr in the terrorist battle, they go to heaven and get 72 virgins. So they are, in fact, a death cult. That is a very accurate description, which is why it bothers leftists and liberals and Orwellians so much. Here, let me quote a couple of people in the Sydney Morning Herald who are outraged that Tony Abbott calls the Islamic State a death cult. They quote Khadr Sayed, a Muslim youth worker and secretary of the Islamic Council of Victoria. And here's what he says. For mainstream Australians, it creates a perception that these people are violent psychopaths. Yeah, they are. Don't you recall the footage of them marching Christians to the sea and slitting their throats? Or burning people alive? They are violent psychopaths. He also says, for, quote, for the more impressionable, sympathetic ear, say a young man angry with the world, the term has little meaning. Death cult is an outdated term without the same connotations it had in the 80s or 90s. Well, we don't need to refer to things in the 80s or 90s. We have a death cult today. I don't see the objection, other than the real objection, that it is a true description and we mustn't describe things accurately in Orwell's newspeak. But you don't have to go to a Muslim activist to find a critic of Tony Abbott. Here's a liberal Jew, of course, Michelle Grossman, a professor of cultural diversity at Victoria University. She says it's dangerous to use a term that only reflects one small part of the reality of the Islamic State. Here, I got to quote this Jewish professor who's saying that the Islamic State really isn't that bad. You just got to get to know these guys. Here's the professor. It's too easy to overlook the elements of the Islamic State narrative that focus on building a new world and a new order, promising action, power, and engagement. This holds enormous potential appeal, especially for the young. Now, it is true that part of the cult recruitment of the Islamic State is to tell young people that they're building this Islamic utopia. That's true. But that is not the reality of what the Islamic State does. They are a death cult. It is not a utopia in Iraq and Syria where the Islamic State rules. It's another Holocaust, just not yet on the same scale. But here you have a Jewish professor of cultural diversity and saying, hey, don't paint all the Islamic State terrorists with the same brush. Yeah, Orwell wrote his book, well, more than half a century ago, but newspeak and Orwell, they're still alive. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.